Good afternoon. Today's Daf Yomi is Daled, and we are moving right along, and the Gemara is trying to understand. The Gemara is discussing, according to Rabbah, what's the reason why if an agent brings the get from overseas, he has to say b'fanei nechtam, because we want to make sure it was done l'shma. And according to Rava, the reason is, hold on one second. According to Rava, the reason is because otherwise we're going to say that maybe we want to make sure that the document is certified, that the get is certified. Kiyum shtaros. So the Gemara said, well, let's try and see who's the author of our Mishnah requires both b'fanei nechtam, that it both be written and signed l'shma, according to Rabbah. So the Gemara says, how can it be Rebbe Meir? Because Rebbe Meir only requires the signing Lishma, not the writing Lishma. So then the Gemara says, well, maybe it's Rebbe Eliezer, because Rebbe Eliezer, maybe it's Rebbe Eliezer. Gemara says it can't be Rebbe Eliezer, because we know that the Mishnah says Rebbe Eliezer doesn't require signatures at all. He just requires the writing Lishma, but he doesn't actually require signatures on the document. The only reason why he requires that is on account of Tikkun Olam. So the Gemara says, okay, let's go back and say it's Rebbe Meir. And maybe when Rebbe Meir doesn't require Ksiva Lishma, that's only biblically speaking, but maybe rabbinically speaking, he requires it. But we can't say that, says the Gemara, because Rebbe Meir says that even if you find it written in find the get in the trash, it's still okay. And so the Gemara says, on top of Dawud Amid Aleph, it must be who's the author of our Mishnah who says that we require both Ksiva and Chasima Lishma. It must be on 4a, 3 lines from the top, Elohim Rebbe Elazar. It must be it's Rebbe Elazar. And Elazar is the author of our Mishnah requires both Ksiva and Chasima Lishma. Rebbe Elazar Chasima. And what about the fact that Rebbe Elazar says that we don't require Chasima Lishma, that we don't require the signatures on the get, that the only reason why we require it is Tikkun Olam, we don't really require it, and it's kosher even without the signatures. That's Hecha Deleka Edem Chal. That's where there would be no witnesses at all on it. But Hecha Deika Edem, would there actually be witnesses on it? Then he would require that the witnesses be done correctly, Lishma. Because Yama Rabbi Abba, Mod Rabbi Eliezer ben Mesuyach Mitocho, because Rabbi Eliezer himself admits that in a circumstance where the document was mezuyov mintocha, where it was forged, where it was inherently wrong, let's say the witnesses were false, they were relatives, that then, even though you don't require witnesses, but if you have the witnesses on it and they're disqualified, that it's possible. So that's what the Gemara says at this point, that we can say that the author of our Mishnah requires both the writing and the signing Lishma can be Rebbe Elazar. And when Rebbe Elazar, even though Rebbe Elazar doesn't require the signing Lishma, but since it was signed, he needs that to have been done properly. Now the Gemara says, well, Rav Ashi gives a dumber answer. Rav Ashi says, Hamani Rebbe Yehuda. He says, who's the author of our Mishnah who requires both Ksiva and Hasima Lishma? Hold on one second. So who's the author of our Mishnah who says Ksiva Chasim Lashma? We suggested it could be Rebbe Elazar. Now the Gemara says that maybe it is Rebbe Yehuda. Maybe the author of our Mishnah is Rebbe Yehuda. The Tanan, Rebbe Yehuda poso ache take ksivaso v'chasimaso b'talish. So because it says explicitly in the Mishnah that Rebbe Yehuda says it's disqualified unless both the writing and the signatures are done on the document when it was removed from the ground. So we see from here that it could very easily be Rebbe Yehuda that he requires ksiva and chasima lishma. So the Gemara says, well, yeah, that's a really good source. Well, if that's the case with Meikara, and it's not an obscure source, it's a Mishnah. So Meikara, well, if that's the case, initially speaking, my taima, well, Mukmir Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reason why the Gemara didn't just cite Rabbi Yehuda? Why do we have to run to these difficult answers? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Elazar don't really fit. So the Gemara explains. The Gemara says, "Ma'adrina not Rabbi Meir." We tried to suggest that it was Rabbi Meir, the Stam Masnisim Rabbi Meir, because as a general rule, an anonymous Mishnah, we're going to assume is Rabbi Meir. So therefore, we'd rather assume that if it's possible that this Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and Madrina no Rebbe Lazar, and then we also tried to prove that the Stam Mishnah is Rebbe Lazar, the Kaimu and Hilchos Hakavase beGittin, because we have a general principle that the halacha is like Rebbe Lazar as it comes to Gittin, and so therefore we'd like to say that the Mishnah is like Rebbe Lazar, and so therefore we're going to say that it's Rebbe Lazar, except if the fact who doesn't require chasima, except in this case, if it was Mizuyuf Mesocho, he says it's going to be disqualified. So now the Gemara says, let's look back at our Mishnah and see which one of them fits better with Rabbah and which fits with Rava. So Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, then Rabbi Gamliel says you need to say b'fanei nechtam, even if you bring it, that Anakama says if you bring it from Medina Sayam, from overseas. Rabbi Gamliel says even if you bring it from Rekem, Mina Rekem, Mina Chager, even if you bring it from Rekem and Chager, these are places that are close by. And Rabbi Eliezer says, "Afil mikfar ludim lulud." Rabbi Eliezer says, even from kfar ludim to lud, which is presumably even closer than Rekem and Chager to the land of Canaan. So the Gemara says, Abai wants to know what's the dispute between dispute between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. So the Abai says, "Bayarosa smuchos le'eretz Yisrael." Abai says that we're dealing with two different types of cities. And the Rabbi Gamliel is dealing with those cities that are close to the land of Israel, i.e., they're near the border. Rekem and Chager, they're not far away. And Rabbi Gamliel says they still need to say it, and Rabbi Eliezer is dealing with those cities that are muvlos. That means that they're partially contained within the boundaries of the land of Israel, but they're not completely contained within it. So it's even closer than Rekem and Chager. So this is let's read the Rashi here. Let's see what Rashi says. Hold on one second. So look at what the Rashi says. Rashi says, Ayaros Awalu, that Rabbi Gamliel adds on, those are the cities that are next to the land of Israel. That's the Rechem and Chager. And those of Rabbi Eliezer, they are even closer. They're partially contained within the boundaries, but they're not part of Eretz Yisrael. So the Tanakhama's other position, as Rashi explains it, that those that are next to, they don't need it at all because they're next to. And Rabbi Gamliel adds on that even those who are next to it also have to say that they require b'fanei nechtam, but those that are muvlos, that they're partially and they don't need to say it. Rabbi Eliezer adds on those that are muvlos, they also have to say b'fanei nechtam. So that's the dispute. So the Gemara says, that's what Abai says, what they're arguing about. I saw this place that was, what's this place like Farludim Tulud, which Rabbi Eliezer requires it and nobody else does. He says, I saw this place. It was like this place from Beit Pubi to Pumpadisa. Mikol the Tanakhama Savar. So the Gemara says, okay, so we see from here, Hani Lotzar, the Tanakhama's on the position that the Smuchos and the Muvos, the cities that are next to and contained within the boundaries, don't require b'fanei nechtam. So my life, okay. So what's the nature of the dispute between Tanakhama, Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Eliezer? Mar Savar must be that one is on the position that that the ones Tanakhama is in the position that the whole reason why they have to say b'fanei nechtam is because they're not experts in Lishma. And therefore the place that's next to the land of Israel are learned. And so therefore they don't have to say it. Whereas Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer must be at the position that there's no witnesses to certify. And that's what we need. And also in this circumstance, there's no witnesses to certify. So maybe this dispute between Rabba and Rava is really contained within the dispute between the Tanakhama versus Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. And Gemara says, no, Rabba Mataras Tamei, but Rabba Mataras Tamei. Both Rabba and Rava could fit their arguments within the entirety of the Mishnah. Rabba Mataras Tamei, Rabba would say, everybody says the whole reason why we require Rabbi would say the whole reason why we require the Fanei Nachtam is because they're not experts in Lishma, even according to Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. Let's forget what's the dispute between the Tanakama, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer. Tanakama Savar Hani Kivin Dismuchos Migmargniri. Tanakama says they're experts. Rabbi Gamliel says those who are muvos, they're within the partially of the boundaries, they are experts, but not those who are next to it. Rabbi Eliezer, remember, muvos namilo. He says even those who are within those boundaries, they're really ignorant. They don't know this law of Lishma. And Rabbi Eliezer says it's not that they don't know about Lishma, but we just don't want to draw distinctions. If you're out, once you're outside the land of Israel, we're going to say everywhere you need to say it because we don't want to make any distinctions. And also, Rava Metaras Otamei, Rava says the whole point is Kiyum Shtaros. He also can explain it. He says the Kuli Amal Fisha Einei Demitzui. He said everybody says the reason why you need to. Everybody says the reasoning about why you need to say Fanei Nachlav is because we need to certify the signatures. But Tanakama Savar and Tanakama is the position Hani Kim Nismuchos because these people are right next to the land of Israel. Mishkach Shchichei. And so therefore you can certify it because they're right next to them. Rabbi Gamliel comes along and says, listen, the muvos, those who are next to it, they are common. Muvos are shlichei, those who are next to the land of Israel, you're going to find witnesses to certify it. But smuchos lo shlichei. Rabbi Gamliel says if you're contained within the boundary, then it's going to be muvos, like you're partially inside the boundaries. Then it is a case of shlichei, and so therefore you don't need to say b'fanei nachtam. But if you're just next to it, then you need to say it. No, so Rabbi Eliezer muvos namio. Rabbi Eliezer says no, we don't want to draw a distinction. Once it's overseas, once it's outside the land of Israel, even if it's muvos, you have to say b'fanei nachlav, so you don't draw any distinctions. Gemara is going to bring another attempt to say that the dispute. Gemara says actually now we want to try to figure out what's the fourth position in the Gemara, position of the Chachamim. There's a Tanakam at the beginning who says anywhere outside Medina Sayam you say b'fanei nachlav. Rabbi Gamliel says you say it in this even in the cities that are next to it, but not in the cities that are muvos. And then Rabbi Eliezer says you even say in the cities that are muvos. So basically there's three positions. Tanakama is saying you only say it far away, but not the next door cities. Rabbi Gamliel says even the next door cities you say it. And Rabbi Eliezer says you say it in all the cities, even the ones that are absorbed within the boundaries, they're just open on one end. They're not part of the land of Israel. But now we have a fourth position in the Mishnah, which is the position of the Chachamim who say that even if you bring it from the land of Israel to Medina Sayam, you also have to say b'fanei nachtam. As it says in the Mishnah, Tanam Chachamim Omer me'eno tzarach sheyomer b'fanei nachtam, ela maybe mi Medina Sayam v'amolech. So the Chachamim say even somebody who brings it from Eretz Yisrael to Medina Sayam also have to say it. We call the Tanakama Savar Moach Lo Tzarach. We see from here the Tanakama says that if you bring it from the land of Israel to Medina Sayam, you don't need to say b'fanei nachtam. My Rabba says, oh, maybe this is the dispute between Rabba and Rava. What's the dispute? The Marasavra Pishaim became Lashma. That the Tanakama says that if you bring it from Israel, you don't need to say b'fanei nachlav because he says the whole reason why you have to say it is because they're not experts in Lashma. And from Israel, they're experts. They're Hani Gemiri, on top of Dalan and Bezin. These people are experts. Narasavar, whereas the Chachamim are of the position that it has to be because of Kim Shtaros. He says because you need witnesses to certify it, and therefore if you bring it from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, there's no witnesses to certify it. Gemara says no. Rabba Metaras Otamei ve'Rava Metaras Otamei. Both Rabba and Rava answer this according to their logic, meaning that both of them are going to say, according to their logic, both of them are going to say it according to their logic. How so? Both of them are going to say it according to their logic. They both can say both the Tanakama and the Chachamim will be consistent with their position. The Kuyama, everybody says the reason is everybody says the whole reason is because they're not experts. So everybody says, and this is what Rabba would say, Rabbi, it says everybody says the reason why you have to say b'fanei nachtam is because they're not experts l'shma. The question is whether, because once we establish that we're concerned about they're not experts on Lashma, whether we also make a gzeira on the people bringing from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, because maybe we're going to confuse it the other way as well. Tanakama says we wouldn't make such a decree. Rabbanan Basrai Savri Gazrina Moachatu maybe. The Rabbanan and the Chachamim of the Mishnah, they would say we do make such a decree and therefore they require it. But Rava Mitaras Tamei, Rava explains this according to his logic. He says the Kuli Fisha in Edam Mitsuin Lataimo. Since everybody says the reason why you have to bring that, why you have to say funny nachtam, because we're worried about witnesses being able to certify it. And so therefore, you would really have to do it in all cases. And so therefore, what does he say? Rabbanan Basrai, the Ferushe time at the Tanakama doesn't. The Tanakama doesn't say you don't need to bring it if it's coming from Eretz Yisrael to Babel. Just the opposite. The Rabbanan Basrai, the Chacham and the Mishnah are really the same as the Tanakama at the outset. They're just explaining their logic. And so therefore, we can assume that both Rabba and Rava could explain the Mishnah properly. So Gemara now challenges Rabba's explanation. Remember, Rabba says that the whole reason is to make sure it was done Lashma Tanan. So we learned in our Mishnah, maybe get Medina Sayam, that if you bring the get from one Medina to the other Medina in Medina Sayam, that you have to say b'fanei nachtam. So that's what the Gemara says, that if you bring the get from one province to another province outside overseas, you need to say b'fanei nachtam. Haba osa Medina Sayam. But if we'll be in the same province in Medina Sayam, lo tzarech. But you don't need to bring it. But according to Rabbi, who says the whole reason is because outside the land of Israel, we're not sure that they know what they're talking about with respect to Lishma. He should require it. So the Gemara says, according to Rava, who says that the whole reason is certification, it will make sense why you don't require it if they're in the same province. But according to Rava, who says the whole reason is because of Lishma, you should require it even if it's in the same province overseas. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, Lo tema, no, read it differently. Lo tema osim in Medina sayam lo tzarach. Don't read it that, if it's in the same province, in the same state overseas, you don't need to say it. Read the foil to that statement is not within the same province overseas. You don't need to say Medina sayam, but say from one province to another province in the land of Israel, you don't need to say it. The Gemara says it can't be that that's the way we read it. But because that clause is explicitly stated, maybe get by Eretz Yisrael, that someone who brings a get in the land of Israel doesn't need to say it. So it's clear it's not referring to that. It must be referring to that if you bring it within the same state, that you don't need to say it. So it's a question on Rabbah. So Gemara answered, no, Rabbah would say, if it's from that statement, I might have said that this law, that if you're going from one province to another in the land of Israel, you don't require it, that's b'diavad. But l'chatchila, well, we would have said that l'chatchila, we would have required it. Kamash Malan, that even l'chatchila, the shliach coming from within the land of Israel does not need to say fanei nachtam, chanei nachtam. The ikid demosav lahachi, and some are medayik from the Mishnah, just the opposite. And they ask the question not on Rava but on Rava. It says if you bring it from one Medina to another Medina, you need to within the land of Israel, outside the land of Israel, you need to say fanei nachtam. Haba Medina be'eretz Yisrael. Doesn't that prove that from one Medina to another Medina in the land of Israel you don't need to? Well, isn't this a question on Rava? Because he says it's about Lishma, but Rava Kasha, because he says about Kiyum Shtaros, and where's the Kiyum Shtaros there? So the Gemara says, we'll read it to the opposite. Read the opposite way, that it's to tell us that within the same Medina, outside the land of Israel, you don't need to bring it. But from Medina to another Medina in the land of Israel, you need to say Fanei Nachtam. If that's the case, listen, maybe Medina Stam. So if that's the case, it should have just said, if you bring it from one province to another province, you need to say it. And you don't even need to say specifically outside the land of Israel. And apply both to Israel and outside the land of Israel. Gemara says you're right. Medina Beretz Shalom Nami L'Tzarach. That really from one province to another province out in the land of Israel, you don't need to say it. The Kivin the Ike Oe Regal and Mishkach Shlichi. Because there's no problem about Kiyum Shtaros. There's always people who are going back and forth because the pilgrims are always coming. Gemara says, yeah, Tainach Bisman Shabbos Mikdash Kayim. That only makes sense when the temple is standing. When there's no temple, what are you going to say? There's no kiyum shtaros. So then you should require according to Rava. Mar says kiyum deika bate dinan dikvi mishkach shlich. Since Ezra instituted that there will be bate dinan who in the land of Israel will always come on Monday and Thursday, therefore it's always common. Mar again challenges Rabba. The Gemara says, Tanan Rabbi Shimon Gamliel afilu Omer afilu mi hegemonia lehegemonia. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, even from one hegemon, from one city, city to another city, you're still going to require that they say Fanei Nachtam. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Irachas Haisa Be'eretz Yisrael. There was one city in the land of Israel. The Asasios Shema. It was called Asasios. And they had two hegmonios, two rulers who were very makbid on each other. They were very exacting on the other one, and they didn't allow the people of one city to go to another city, like East Berlin and West Berlin. Therefore, they required to say Fanei Nachtam from one rulership to another. According to Rava, it's good because you can't certify the witnesses. So Rabba Kasha, but Rabba, according to Rabba, they both know Fanei Nachtam. They both know it's Lishma. So why do you require it? So the Gemara answers, Rabba Islay de Rava. Rabba agrees with what Rabba says. Rabba, who says that the whole reason is Lishma, he would admit that even in the case that there are, he would also admit that in a place where there are no caravans going forth, you have to also uphold the make sure the get is certified like Rava, and so therefore we would require it. And it's just that he so Rava would admit that we have to be concerned also about kiyum shtaros. So if Rava agrees to Rava, then what's the real difference between them? So the Gemara says, the difference between them is da'asyu ve'trei. The difference between them is, let's say two witnesses come. So if two witnesses come, Rava wouldn't require it, but Rava would require it. Inami ba'osa medina b'medina sayam. Or let's say they're in the same province overseas. So there Rava wouldn't require it, but Rava would require it because of Lishma. So the Gemara is now going to just challenge Rava because Rava agrees to Rava's explanation. Okay, we'll stop here. Everybody should have a good Shabbos. We're going to repeat this stuff on Shabbos, obviously.